The crack of a bullwhip followed by a horse's pained whinny pierced the morning air of Quartzsite, Arizona, in the summer of 1878, causing Zara Jenkins to freeze on the general store's porch. Her basket of supplies clutched tightly against her chest as her heart sank with dread. Zara knew that sound all too well. It was the sound of her betrothed, Harold Prescott, disciplining his horses again. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry as dust as she forced herself to turn and look toward the hitching post where Harold's magnificent black stallion stood trembling, a fresh welt visible on its gleaming flank. "Got to learn respect," Harold was saying loudly to anyone who would listen, his face flushed with anger beneath his expensive bowler hat. "Animal needs to know who's master." Zara felt her stomach twist into knots. In just 3 weeks, she would be married to this man, a marriage arranged by her father to save their struggling ranch from financial ruin. Harold Prescott was the wealthiest man in the territory, owner of the region's largest silver mine and half the businesses in town. What Harold wanted, Harold got, and 6 months ago, he had decided he wanted Zara. She clutched her basket tighter, her knuckles white against the woven wood. The whispers around town about Harold's temper had grown louder in recent weeks. The shopkeepers smiled at him and called him Mr. Prescott to his face, but behind his back they exchanged knowing glances. "Miss Jenkins," a deep voice came from beside her, startling Zara from her thoughts. "Might I help you with your packages?" Turning, Zara found herself looking up into the weathered face of Garrett Adams, a cowboy who had drifted into town about a month ago and found work at the Blackwater Ranch neighboring her father's property. His clothes were dusty from the trail, but his eyes were a clear, steady blue that seemed to see right through her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you, Mr. Adams, but I can manage," she replied, though her voice trembled slightly as another crack of the whip sounded behind them. Garrett's gaze shifted from her face to Harold, who was now yanking roughly on his horse's bridle, then back to Zara. Something in his expression hardened. "That's the man you're to marry?" he asked quietly, nodding toward Harold. Zara nodded stiffly, unable to speak. Garrett's voice dropped even lower, meant for her ears alone. "Miss Jenkins, a man who beats his horses will beat his wife. Imagine what he'll do to you later." His words sent an icy chill down Zara's spine, not because they were shocking, but because they gave voice to the fear that had been growing in her heart these past months. "I have no choice," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "My father's debt. There's always a choice," Garrett interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "Always." Before Zara could respond, Harold's shadow fell across them. "Jenkins," Harold said coldly, ignoring Garrett completely, "I'll be escorting you home. Your father and I have business to discuss." Zara nodded obediently, but as she moved to follow Harold, she felt Garrett's hand brush against hers, pressing something into her palm. She closed her fingers around it instinctively, careful not to let Harold see. Only when she was seated in Harold's expensive carriage, watching Quartzsite's dusty Main Street recede behind them, did she dare to glance at the small, folded paper Garrett had given her. Opening it, she read 5 simple words that would change everything: North Creek. Midnight, if willing. The Jenkins Ranch sat on the outskirts of Quartzsite. A modest spread that had once been prosperous before drought and bad luck had withered its fortunes like sun-scorched grass. As Harold's carriage approached, Zara could see her father waiting on the porch, his once proud shoulders now permanently stooped with worry. "Remember to smile," Harold instructed her coldly as he helped her down from the carriage with a grip that was just a little too tight. "Your father and I are finalizing the paperwork today." Zara forced her lips to curve upward, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. She'd gotten good at these pretend smiles over the past 6 months. Inside the house, the air was stifling despite the open windows. Her mother bustled about, serving coffee with trembling hands, while her younger sister Lily, only 16, watched wide-eyed from the kitchen doorway. "The final payment will be made on the wedding day," Harold was explaining to her father, George Jenkins, as he spread papers across the worn dining table. "At that point, all debts will be considered settled." Her father nodded, relief evident in his tired eyes. "You're saving this family, Harold." "We're eternally grateful." Zara's fingers closed around the note in her pocket. North Creek, midnight, if willing. Was she willing? Could she actually consider running away, abandoning her family to financial ruin? Harold's voice cut through her thoughts. "Of course, I'll expect Zara to cease her work with those filthy ranch hands. A wife of mine will not be mending fences and delivering foals like some common laborer." "Of course," her father agreed quickly, though Zara saw the brief flicker of surprise in his eyes. She had always worked alongside the ranch hands. It was the life she knew and loved. "And we'll be moving to my new house in town after the wedding. I've no interest in living out here in the dust," Harold continued. "You can visit on Sundays, of course." Each word was another chain being wrapped around Zara's future. She excused herself quietly, slipping out the back door and walking quickly toward the stables where she could breathe freely for a moment. Inside, she leaned against the stall of her beloved mare, Willow, burying her face in the horse's warm neck. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, inhaling the comforting scent of hay and horse. "Talking to horses now, Zara," a familiar voice teased from the doorway. "People will think you've gone touched in the head." Thomas, her father's foreman and her oldest friend, stepped into the shadowy interior of the stable. At 27, Thomas was like the brother she'd never had, having worked on the Jenkins ranch since he was 14. "I'm to be married in 3 weeks," she said hollowly, "to a man who beats his horses." Thomas's smile faded. "I know, the whole town knows what kind of man Prescott is, and yet everyone expects me to marry him anyway. Your father doesn't have a choice, Zara. The bank's going to foreclose if he can't pay. The drought hit us all hard." "There's always a choice," she said, echoing Garrett's words. "Thomas, have you met the new hand over at Blackwater Ranch, Garrett Adams?" Thomas's expression became guarded. "I've met him. Seems a decent sort. Knows his way around horses better than most." He paused. "Why do you ask?" Zara hesitated, then pulled out the note. Thomas read it quickly, his eyes widening. "Zara, you can't possibly be thinking of, I don't know what I'm thinking," she admitted. "But today, Harold told my father I won't be allowed to work on the ranch after we're married. I'll be kept in town like some porcelain doll, only allowed to see my family on Sundays." Thomas cursed under his breath. "That's not right, that's not you at all, and that's not even the worst part." Zara's voice dropped to a whisper. "This morning, I saw him whip his horse for no reason other than it shifted its weight while tied. What will he do to me the first time I displease him?" "He wouldn't dare," Thomas said, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. "Wouldn't he?" "Who would stop him? Once I'm his wife, I'm his property, just like that horse." They fell silent as the stable door creaked open again. Harold's shadow stretched across the dirt floor. "There you are," he said, his voice pleasant enough, though his eyes were cold as they darted between Zara and Thomas. "Your father is looking for you, dear, and you," he addressed Thomas, "shouldn't you be working instead of chatting up my fiancé?" Thomas straightened, his jaw tight. "I was just checking with Miss Jenkins about tomorrow's schedule, sir. We've got calves to brand." "Well, that's hardly her concern anymore," Harold said dismissively. "Come along, Zara." As she followed Harold back to the house, Zara felt the note burning in her pocket like a brand. North Creek. Midnight, if willing. With each step, her resolve hardened. She would be there. The hours crawled by like wounded animals. Dinner was a tense affair, with Harold dominating the conversation, laying out his plans for Zara's future as if she had no say in the matter. Her new wardrobe, her social obligations as Mrs. Prescott, the charity committees she would join. Zara pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. Finally, Harold departed with a possessive kiss to her cheek that made her skin crawl. 3 weeks, he reminded her. "Then you'll be mine completely." After her parents and Lily had gone to bed, Zara moved silently through the darkened house. She changed into her riding clothes and packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, the little money she had saved. She scribbled a note for her family, explaining that she couldn't go through with the marriage, that she was sorry for the pain she would cause them, but that she had to find her own way. The moon was high and bright as she slipped out to the stables and saddled Willow. The mare sensed her urgency and stood perfectly still, only her flickering ears betraying her excitement at a midnight ride. "We have to be quiet, girl," Zara whispered, leading the horse away from the ranch before mounting. She'd ridden these lands all her life and knew the way to North Creek blindfolded. It was a secluded spot about 3 miles from the ranch where the water ran cool and clear even in summer. As she approached the creek, doubt began to gnaw at her. What if this was a trick? What if Garrett Adams wasn't the man she thought he was? What if then she saw him, sitting on a fallen log beside 2 saddled horses, his hat pushed back on his head as he stared up at the stars? He turned at the sound of Willow's hooves, and even in the moonlight, Zara could see the relief that washed over his face when he recognized her. "You came," he said simply, standing as she dismounted. "I came," she agreed, her voice steadier than she felt. "But I need to understand why you're doing this. You barely know me." Garrett stepped closer, his face serious in the moonlight. "I know enough. I know you're being sold to a man who treats his animals cruelly, and I know what that means for any woman unfortunate enough to be his wife." He paused. "And I know that when I first saw you last month, helping deliver the Watson twins' foal in that thunderstorm, I thought to myself, there's a woman with more courage and heart than most men I've known." Zara felt heat rising to her cheeks, remembering that night she'd been covered in mud and other things less mentionable, certainly not looking her best. "Where would we go?" she asked, practical concerns pushing through her surprise. "North, to Colorado. I've got a friend who owns a horse ranch near Denver. He's been asking me to come work with him for years." Garrett gestured to the second horse. "That's Thunderbolt, best trail horse I've ever known. He'll carry your belongings." "And what would I be to you?" Zara asked bluntly. "I won't trade one form of bondage for another." Garrett's expression grew solemn. "You'd be free, Miss Jenkins, free to find work, free to make your own way. I'm offering you escape, not ownership. Though I won't deny I hope to court you properly once we're settled if you're willing." The honesty in his voice resonated with something deep inside her. This wasn't about desire or possession, this was about choice. The choice Harold would never give her. "My family," she said, her voice catching. "The ranch will be lost." "I thought about that," Garrett said, reaching into his saddlebag and pulling out a small leather pouch. "This is everything I've saved over the past 10 years. It's not enough to clear your father's debt completely, but it might buy him time to find another solution." Zara stared at the pouch, then at Garrett. "Why would you do that? It's your life savings." "Because no one should have to sell their daughter to save their land," he said simply, "and because I couldn't live with myself if I rode away knowing I'd left your family destitute." In that moment, Zara knew she was making the right choice. She took the pouch and secured it in her saddlebag. "We need to leave my family the money," she said, "and then we need to ride fast. Harold will come after us when he discovers I'm gone." Garrett nodded grimly. "I know. That's why we need to be across the territorial line before sunrise." "Are you sure about this, Zara? Once we leave, there's no coming back, not for a long while at least." Zara took one last look in the direction of her family's ranch, the only home she'd ever known. Then she turned back to Garrett, her decision made. "I'm sure." They rode back to the ranch under cover of darkness. Zara slipped inside and left the pouch and a new note explaining the money on her father's desk. She took one last look around the house where she'd grown up, tears stinging her eyes as she silently said goodbye. Outside, Garrett was keeping watch, tension evident in every line of his body. "All set?" he asked as she emerged. Zara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They mounted their horses and set off, keeping to the shadows as they passed through the sleeping town of Quartzsite. Only when they were well beyond the town limits did they urge their horses into a gallop, racing against the coming dawn. As the first pale light of morning began to streak the eastern sky, they crossed into the New Mexico territory. Zara felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. For the first time in her life, she was truly free to choose her own path, free to discover who she really was beyond the constraints of family obligation and societal expectations. Garrett glanced over at her, his expression questioning. "Any regrets?" Zara shook her head, a genuine smile spreading across her face. Not one. Little did they know that back in quartzsite, Harold Prescott was already awake, standing in Zara's empty bedroom, her farewell note crumpled in his white-knuckled fist. His face contorted with rage as he swore vengeance on the woman who had dared to defy him and the man who had helped her escape. They rode hard for 3 days, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses and catch a few hours of sleep. Garrett proved to be an expert traveler, familiar with hidden water sources and sheltered camping spots well off the main trails. They avoided towns and settlements, knowing that Harold might have telegraphed ahead to alert lawmen to be on the lookout for them. On the evening of the 3rd day, they made camp in a secluded canyon, the walls providing both protection from the elements and concealment from prying eyes. As Garrett built a small, nearly smokeless fire, Zara tended to the horses, checking their hooves and legs for signs of stress from the hard riding. "They're holding up well," she said as she joined Garrett by the fire, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Willow's never traveled this far before, but she's strong." "Like her mistress," Garrett observed with a small smile. In the dancing light of the fire, Zara studied his face openly for the first time. The past few days had been so focused on survival and evasion that she'd hardly had time to truly look at the man she'd staked her future on. His features were rugged, shaped by years of outdoor living, but there was a gentleness around his eyes that she found reassuring. He wore his light brown hair longer than was fashionable, tied back with a leather cord, and his beard was neatly trimmed despite days on the trail. "Tell me about Colorado," she said, sipping her coffee. "And this friend of yours with the horse ranch." "Walter Simmons," Garrett replied, settling back against his saddle. "We served together in the war, both on the Union side. After, when many men couldn't settle back into normal life, Walt found his peace with horses. Started with just a few acres and 3 brood mares. Now he's got one of the finest breeding operations in the territory." He paused, smiling at some memory. "He's a good man, married a local girl, Eliza, about 5 years back. They've got twin boys now, just turned 3. And he'll welcome us, both of us," Garrett nodded. "Walt's been after me to join him for years. Says I've got away with the difficult cases, the horses no one else can gentle." His expression grew more serious. "As for you, I sent a telegram before we left when I first started thinking about this plan. Didn't give details, just asked if he could use another pair of hands, including a woman skilled with horses and ranch work." "What did he say?" Zara asked, curious. "Said his wife would welcome the company and that anyone I vouched for would be welcome at Clearwater Ranch." Zara felt some of the tension ease from her shoulders. "That's good. I was worried about," she broke off, embarrassed. "About your reputation," Garrett finished for her. "Traveling alone with a man you barely know," she nodded, eyes dropping to her coffee cup. "Walt and Eliza aren't the type to judge," Garrett assured her. "And once we're settled, if you decide you want to make your own way elsewhere, they'll help you do that too." "You'd really let me go, just like that?" Zara asked, genuinely surprised. Garrett's eyes met hers steadily across the fire. "I meant what I said, Zara. I'm offering you freedom, not another cage. Whatever happens between us, whether it's friendship, more than friendship, or just 2 people who helped each other in a time of need, it has to be your choice. Always." Something warm unfurled in Zara's chest at his words. In a world where women were so often treated as property to be bartered and traded, Garrett Adams was offering her something precious indeed, genuine autonomy. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the canyon and the occasional soft nickering of the horses. Eventually, Zara asked the question that had been on her mind since they'd left quartzsite. "You think Harold will come after us himself or send someone?" Garrett's expression darkened. "Men like Prescott don't take kindly to having their possessions stolen, and make no mistake, that's how he sees you. From what I gathered in town, he's not the type to let this go." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "But he's also not the type to do his own dirty work if he can avoid it. My guess, he'll hire someone." Zara shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "A bounty hunter, possibly, Or he might try to use the law, claim you stole property when you left, that horse of yours, for instance. Willow was a gift from my father on my 16th birthday, Zara said indignantly. I have papers to prove it. Did you bring them with you? Zara's face fell. No, they're in my father's desk. Then it's his word against yours, and he's a wealthy man with influence. Garrett sighed. We'll need to be careful until we reach Colorado. Stay off the main trails, avoid towns where possible. He hesitated, then added, and it might be wise if we posed as husband and wife when we do need to interact with others. A married couple attracts less attention than a single woman traveling with a man who's not her kin. Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks at the suggestion, but she recognized the practicality of it. That makes sense, she agreed. We should have a story prepared. They spent the next hour crafting their false identities. They would be Garrett and Zara Wilson, newlyweds traveling to Colorado to join his brother's ranch. They worked out details of their supposed courtship and wedding, agreeing on enough specifics to answer casual questions without creating an overly complicated tale that might trip them up. As the fire burned down to embers, Garrett stood and stretched. You should get some sleep. I'll take first watch. Zara wanted to protest, to insist she could take a turn at keeping watch too, but exhaustion was washing over her in waves. She hadn't slept properly since they'd left quartzsite, too anxious and alert to fully relax. Wake me for the second watch, she said, unwrapping her bedroll. I will, Garrett promised, though something in his tone made Zara suspect he had no intention of doing so. She settled into her blankets, her body aching from days in the saddle. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as her mind churned with thoughts of her family. Had they found her note yet? Were they worried, angry? Did they understand why she had to leave? And then there was Harold. The thought of his rage when he discovered her gone sent another shiver through her. What would he do to her if he caught them? What would he do to Garrett? Stop thinking so loud. Garrett's voice came gently from where he sat at the edge of their small camp. I can hear the wheels turning from here. Zara turned on her side to look at him, his profile silhouetted against the starry sky. I can't help it. I've never done anything like this before. Few have, he replied, but you're doing fine, better than fine. Are you always this calm? She asked, genuinely curious. Garrett chuckled softly. No, but I learned a long time ago that panic doesn't help in a tight spot, just wastes energy you need for thinking clearly. In the war, she ventured, remembering he'd mentioned serving. He was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, partly and after. I spent some years with the Pony Express, then scouting for wagon trains heading west. You learn quickly that on the frontier, losing your head can get you killed. There was something in his voice, a shadow of old pain, that made Zara want to know more. But she sensed it wasn't the time to press further. Instead, she said simply, I'm glad you're the one who's with me then. Garrett turned to look at her, his expression hidden in the darkness. Try to sleep, Zara. Tomorrow's another long day. She closed her eyes, expecting sleep to continue evading her. Instead, lulled by the soft sounds of the night and the reassuring presence of her companion, she drifted off almost immediately. She awoke with a start some hours later, disoriented in the pre-dawn darkness. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or why she wasn't in her bed at home. Then it all came rushing back: her escape, Garrett, their journey north, Garrett. She sat up quickly, looking around the camp. He was still sitting in the same spot, his rifle across his knees, gaze fixed on the canyon entrance. He hadn't woken her for her watch. You were supposed to wake me, she said accusingly, rising and wrapping her blanket around her shoulders against the pre-dawn chill. You needed the sleep more than I needed it, he replied simply, not looking at her. That wasn't our agreement. We're partners in this, Garrett. That means sharing the burden equally. Now he did turn to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. Partners. Yes, partners, Zara said firmly, coming to sit beside him. I'm not some damsel you rescued who now needs to be coddled and protected. I made this choice and I'll carry my share of the responsibilities that come with it. A slow smile spread across Garrett's tired face. Yes, madam, he said, a hint of teasing in his tone but respect in his eyes. Partners it is. And as your partner, I'd be much obliged if you'd make us some coffee while I check on the horses. We should get moving soon." Zara nodded, satisfied, and set about rekindling the fire. As she worked, she found herself smiling. Partners. It felt right somehow. They packed up camp efficiently and were on their way as the first rays of sunlight began to illuminate the canyon walls. Garrett led them through a narrow, twisting path that wound up the canyon side, a route Zara would never have noticed on her own. "How do you know these hidden trails?" she asked as they emerged onto a high plateau that afforded a breathtaking view of the surrounding territory. "Spent some time with the Apache after the war," Garrett replied, scanning the horizon before turning his horse northward. "Learn to read the land from them. Most folks stick to the obvious paths, but there's almost always another way if you know how to look." Zara's eyebrows rose in surprise. It was unusual for a white man to have lived among the Apache and returned to tell of it. "They accepted you." Garrett's expression grew distant. "Not at first. I was captured during a raid on a supply train I was guarding, expected to be killed, but their medicine man had a vision about me. Said I had a spirit that understood horses." He shrugged. "They put me to work with their herd instead. Eventually, I earned enough respect to be allowed to leave when I wanted to." "That's remarkable," Zara said, genuinely impressed. "They're remarkable people," Garrett corrected. "Taught me more about honor and respect in 2 years than I'd learned in the rest of my life combined." He paused, then added, "They also taught me that a man who abuses animals or women has a sickness in his soul that can't be cured." Zara thought about Harold, about the cold calculation in his eyes when he looked at her. "I think you're right about that." They rode in silence for a while, making good time across the open plateau. By midday, they had descended into a forest of ponderosa pine, the temperature noticeably cooler under the canopy of trees. They stopped by a small stream to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch of jerky and hardtack. "We're making good progress," Garrett said as they rested in the dappled shade. "Another 4 or 5 days and we should reach Colorado territory. From there, it's maybe 3 more to Clearwater Ranch." "And you're sure we'll be safe there?" Zara asked, unable to shake the anxiety that had been her constant companion since leaving Quartzsite. "As sure as anyone can be of anything in this world," Garrett replied honestly. "Colorado's a different territory with different laws. Harold Prescott's influence won't reach as far there, and Walt's not the type to turn away friends in need, no matter who comes asking after them." Zara nodded, trying to take comfort in his assurances. But as they prepared to mount up again, a distant sound froze her in place. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, moving fast through the forest. Garrett heard it too, his body instantly alert. "Get on your horse," he said quietly, all trace of relaxation gone from his voice. "Now." They mounted swiftly, Garrett leading them deeper into the trees, away from the stream and the sound of approaching riders. They moved as silently as possible, Garrett frequently stopping to listen, adjusting their course to keep them hidden. The pursuit, if that's what it was, seemed to be following the stream, moving parallel to their path but not directly toward them. After a tense hour of careful travel, the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. "Could be a patrol," Garrett said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Army or territorial rangers, or Harold's men," Zara said, voicing the fear they both felt. "Either way, we need to be more careful." Garrett surveyed the forest around them. "We'll stick to the trees as long as we can, travel at night if necessary." The rest of the day passed in tense vigilance, both of them starting at every snapping twig or rustling leaf. As dusk approached, they found a small clearing surrounded by dense underbrush that would conceal them from casual observation. "No fire tonight," Garrett said as they dismounted. "Cold camp." Zara nodded, understanding the necessity even as she dreaded the thought of another cold meal and the chill that would come with nightfall at this elevation. They tended to the horses in silence, removing saddles and bridles but keeping them close in case they needed to leave quickly. As true darkness fell, the forest came alive with night sounds: the distant howl of a wolf, the hooting of owls, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. Zara found it both beautiful and unnerving, so different from the desert nights she was accustomed to. They sat close together, shoulders touching, sharing a blanket against the growing chill. "Tell me about your family," Garrett said softly, breaking the long silence. "You haven't spoken much about them." Zara was surprised by the question, but found herself wanting to answer. "My father is a good man," she began. "Stubborn, proud, but fair. He built our ranch from nothing after coming west with my mother when they were first married. She's quieter, but strong in her own way had to be to survive as a rancher's wife." She smiled at a memory. "She taught me to read by lamplight after long days of work, insisted I get an education even when my father said ranch work was education enough." "And your sister?" Garrett prompted. "Lily is sunshine in human form," Zara said, affection clear in her voice. "Always laughing, always seeing the good in people. She's only 16 but already has half the boys in the county sweet on her." Her smile faded. "I worry about her now. With me gone, will Harold pressure my father to offer her instead?" Garrett's arm slipped around her shoulders, a gesture of comfort rather than romance. "The money we left will help your father find another way, and Lily has your example now, the courage to choose her own path." Zara leaned slightly into his warmth, finding his presence reassuring. "What about your family?" she asked. "You've never mentioned them." Garrett was quiet for a moment before answering. "Not much to tell. Father was a blacksmith in Pennsylvania, died when I was 14. Mother followed a year later, consumption. No siblings." "I'm sorry," Zara said softly. He shrugged slightly. "It was a long time ago. Joined the army at 16, lied about my age, been making my own way ever since." "Is that why you understand so well about freedom? Because you've had to find your own path?" Garrett considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe it's because I've seen too many people trapped by circumstances or choices made for them by others." He looked down at her, his expression serious even in the darkness. "Life's too short to live it according to someone else's design, Zara." She met his gaze, struck by the conviction in his voice. "I'm beginning to understand that." For a long moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them, then Garrett gently removed his arm from her shoulders. "You should try to sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." "We agreed to be partners," she reminded him. "I'll take a shift tonight." This time he didn't argue. "Wake me in 4 hours then." Zara did wake him exactly 4 hours later, though it cost her to do so. He looked so peaceful in sleep, the lines of worry and vigilance smoothed from his face, making him appear younger and more vulnerable. But a promise was a promise, and they were partners now. The night passed without incident, and they set off again at first light, continuing their cautious journey northward. The next few days fell into a pattern: careful travel by day, cold camps at night, always alert for signs of pursuit. They began to work together with increasing efficiency, anticipating each other's needs and developing an unspoken language of gestures and glances. On the 6th day after leaving Quartzsite, they crossed into Colorado territory. The landscape had changed dramatically. Gone were the arid deserts and cactus-studded plains, replaced by rolling foothills covered in pine and aspen, with the majestic Rocky Mountains rising in the distance. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed as they paused on a ridge overlooking a vast valley. "I've never seen anything like it." "Wait until you see it in autumn," Garrett said, a hint of pride in his voice as if he were personally responsible for the landscape. "When the aspens turn gold, it's like the mountains are on fire." "You love it here," Zara observed, watching his face. "I do," he admitted. "There's something about this country that speaks to me, always has." For the first time since they'd left Arizona, Zara saw Garrett truly relax, his shoulders losing their tension as he gazed out at the land before them. She realized suddenly how much strain he'd been under, how vigilantly he'd been protecting them both. "How much farther to Clearwater Ranch?" she asked. 2 days, maybe less if the weather holds." He glanced at the sky where clouds were beginning to gather. "We should find a town soon, get supplies. We're running low on everything, and I don't like the look of those clouds. Spring storms in these mountains can be brutal." Zara nodded in agreement. Their supplies were indeed dwindling, and after nearly a week on the trail, she longed for a proper meal and maybe even a real bath. "Is it safe?" she asked, the question that was never far from her mind these days. Safer now that we're in Colorado, Garrett replied, and we need supplies. We'll stick to our story, Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, on our way to join family. They found a small settlement called Pine Creek by mid-afternoon, little more than a general store, a saloon, and a handful of houses clustered around a crossroads. It was the kind of place travelers passed through rather than stayed, which suited their purposes perfectly. As they rode into town, Zara was acutely conscious of the curious glances cast their way. Strangers were obviously unusual here, and she was suddenly very aware of her appearance, travel-stained clothes, hair hastily braided and tucked under her hat. "Remember, we're newlyweds," Garrett murmured as they dismounted in front of the general store. He took her hand in his, the gesture both reassuring and oddly intimate. The storekeeper was a garrulous man with a magnificent white beard who introduced himself as Hiram Potter. He eyed them with undisguised curiosity as they gathered supplies, passing through or settling. He asked as he weighed out coffee beans. "Passing through," Garrett replied easily. "On our way to my brother's place near Denver, Clearwater Ranch," recognition flickered in the storekeeper's eyes. "Walter Simmons's spread, fine horses he raises there. You know it." Garrett asked, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Know of it," Potter corrected. "Got a good reputation, you'd be Garrett then. Walt's army friend." Zara felt Garrett tense beside her, though his expression remained pleasant. "That's right, and this is my wife, Zara." The old man's eyes twinkled as he looked between them. "Newlyweds, I'd guess. Got that look about you." Zara felt herself blushing, though whether from the lie or the implication in the man's tone, she wasn't sure. "Just married last month," Garrett confirmed with a smile, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that seemed perfectly natural. "Couldn't wait to bring her to Colorado." "Well, you picked a fine place to start a life together," Potter said approvingly as he continued to gather their supplies. "Though you might want to find lodging for tonight. That storm coming in looks to be a bad one." Garrett glanced at Zara, uncertainty in his eyes. They hadn't planned on staying in town. "Is there a hotel?" Zara asked, making the decision for them. The thought of a real bed and a roof over their heads was too tempting to resist. "No hotel," Potter replied, "but Widow Carmichael takes in travelers from time to time." "House at the end of the street with the blue door. Tell her Hiram sent you." They thanked him, paid for their supplies, and headed to the indicated house. The widow proved to be a tiny, bird-like woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked them up and down critically before agreeing to rent them a room for the night. "One room?" she asked pointedly, her gaze lingering on Zara. "We're married," Zara said, forcing confidence into her voice as she displayed the simple gold band Garrett had purchased for her in the general store, part of their disguise. The widow sniffed but nodded. "Supper's at 6. No liquor, no smoking in the house, and no—" She paused delicately. "Unseemly behavior under my roof." "Yes, madam," Garrett said respectfully. "We're grateful for your hospitality." Their room was small but clean, with a narrow bed that suddenly seemed very small indeed now that they were faced with actually sharing it. They'd slept near each other on the trail, of course, but always with the appropriate distance between them. "I can sleep on the floor," Garrett offered immediately, reading her discomfort. "Don't be ridiculous," Zara said with more conviction than she felt. "We're both adults. And we're supposed to be married. What would the widow think if she found you on the floor?" Garrett looked like he might argue further, but a crack of thunder shook the house, followed immediately by the drumming of heavy rain on the roof. "Looks like we made the right decision to stay," he said instead, moving to the window to watch the downpour. "This is a proper mountain storm, would have been miserable in a tent." Zara joined him at the window, watching as the streets of the little settlement quickly turned to mud, rain coming down in sheets so heavy they could barely see the buildings across the way. Another flash of lightning, followed almost instantly by thunder, made her jump slightly. "Storm's right overhead," Garrett observed. "Might be a while before it passes." They unpacked their few belongings, taking the opportunity to air out bedrolls and clothes that had been damp for days. The widow had provided a pitcher of hot water, and they took turns washing up as best they could behind a makeshift screen Zara created with a blanket. Feeling somewhat refreshed, they headed downstairs for supper, finding the widow's dining room already occupied by her other guests, a traveling salesman from Denver, and a young couple with a baby who were on their way to visit family in Pueblo. Conversation over the simple but hearty meal of stew, biscuits, and apple pie was general and friendly, with no one asking too many personal questions. After dinner, they retired to their room, both suddenly awkward now that the moment of sharing the bed could no longer be avoided. Garrett busied himself checking his guns while Zara brushed out her long hair, working through the tangles that had accumulated during their journey. "You have beautiful hair," Garrett said quietly, watching her from across the room. Zara paused in her brushing, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, my mother always says it's my best feature." "One of many," Garrett replied, then looked embarrassed, as if he hadn't meant to speak aloud. He cleared his throat. "We should get some sleep. We can leave at first light if the storm passes." They took turns changing into their night clothes, both being careful to stay decently covered. Finally, there was nothing left to do but get into bed. They lay side by side, stiff and careful not to touch, listening to the storm rage outside. "This is ridiculous," Zara said after several minutes of uncomfortable silence. "We've slept near each other for a week now." "This is different," Garrett said, his voice tight. "Because we're in a bed, because we're pretending to be married," he replied. "And because I respect you too much to take advantage of that pretense." Zara turned on her side to look at him, his profile just visible in the dim light from the banked fire. "I know that, Garrett. I trust you." He turned to face her then, their faces only inches apart. "Do you?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Thank you for that. It means more than you know." They fell silent again, but the tension had eased, replaced by a comfortable awareness of each other. Eventually, lulled by the sound of rain and the first truly comfortable bed they'd had in days, they both drifted off to sleep. Zara awoke slowly the next morning, conscious first of warmth and comfort, then of the weight of an arm around her waist. Sometime during the night they had gravitated toward each other, and she now found herself nestled against Garrett's chest, his arm holding her securely against him. For a moment she lay perfectly still, not wanting to wake him, not wanting to break the spell of this unexpected intimacy. It felt right somehow to be held by him like this, safe. As if she'd found a harbor after a lifetime at sea, Garrett stirred, his arm tightening briefly around her before his breathing changed, telling her he was awake and aware of their position. She felt him begin to withdraw to put distance between them. "Don't," she said softly, her hand covering his to keep his arm in place. "It's nice." He froze, then relaxed again, his breath warm against the back of her neck. "It is," he agreed, his voice rough with sleep. They lay like that for a few minutes more, neither speaking, both acutely aware of the shift happening between them. Finally, Garrett sighed and gently removed his arm. "We should get ready to leave," he said, sitting up. "The storm sounds like it's passed." Indeed, sunlight was streaming through the curtains, and the only sound from outside was the dripping of water from the eaves. Zara sat up as well, suddenly shy under Garrett's gaze. "I'll go down and see about breakfast," he said, rising and gathering his clothes. "Take your time." After he left, Zara pressed her hands to her cheeks, feeling the warmth there. What was happening to her? She'd left Arizona to escape a loveless marriage, not to fall into another man's arms at the first opportunity. And yet, there was something about Garrett Adams that called to her, something that felt genuine and true. They left Pine Creek after breakfast, their supplies replenished and their spirits lifted by a night of proper rest. The storm had cleared the air, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling in the morning light. They rode in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about the night before and what it might mean. By mid-afternoon, Garrett announced they were entering Clearwater Ranch land. The property was vast, stretching across rolling meadows and up into the foothills, with the Rockies forming a dramatic backdrop. Horses grazed in fenced pastures, magnificent animals that made even Zara, who had grown up around horses all her life, catch her breath in appreciation. Walt breeds for both beauty and endurance, Garrett explained, pride evident in his voice. Some of the finest stock in the territory. As they approached the main house, a substantial two-story structure of hand-hewn logs with a wide, welcoming porch, a man emerged, shading his eyes against the sun as he watched their approach. Behind him came a petite woman, a child balanced on her hip and another clinging to her skirts. Garrett raised his hand in greeting, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Walt," he called. The man on the porch straightened, recognition dawning. "Garrett Adams, as I live and breathe." They dismounted at the hitching rail, and Garrett was immediately engulfed in a bear hug by his friend. Walt Simmons was a big man, broad-shouldered and solid, with a booming laugh that seemed to come from his very soul. "Took you long enough to take me up on my offer," Walt was saying as he released Garrett from his embrace. "Must have been asking for 5 years now." "Some things are worth waiting for," Garrett replied with a smile, turning to gesture Zara forward. "Walt, Eliza, this is Zara Jenkins. Zara, Walter, and Eliza Simmons." If Walt and Eliza were surprised by Garrett's careful avoidance of introducing her as his wife, they didn't show it. Instead, Eliza stepped forward with a warm smile, shifting the child on her hip. "Welcome to Clearwater, Zara. It's so lovely to have another woman around. These men and boys outnumber me terribly." The warmth of the welcome brought unexpected tears to Zara's eyes. After days of uncertainty and fear, the simple kindness was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed, "for welcoming us both. Any friend of Garrett's is family here," Walt declared, clapping a hand on Garrett's shoulder. "Now come inside. You both look like you could use a decent meal and a chance to wash off the trail dust." Inside, the house was as welcoming as its owners, spacious and comfortable, with well-worn furniture and colorful quilts adding warmth to the rustic interior. Eliza showed Zara to a guest room while Walt took Garrett to another, promising hot water for baths would be brought up shortly. Left alone, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden transition from fugitive to guest. For the first time since leaving Quartzsite, she allowed herself to truly believe they might have escaped, that she might actually be free to build a new life here. Later, cleaned up and dressed in fresh clothes borrowed from Eliza, who was closer to her size than Zara would have guessed from first glance, she joined the others for dinner. The meal was lively and informal, with the twin boys Matthew and Mark providing most of the entertainment with their antics. It wasn't until after the children had been put to bed that the real conversation began. Seated in the comfortable parlor with coffee and a plate of Eliza's fresh-baked cookies, Garrett finally explained the true circumstances of their arrival. Walt and Eliza listened without interruption as Garrett outlined Zara's situation with Harold, their escape, and their concern about pursuit. When he finished, Walt let out a low whistle. "That's quite a tale," he said, looking between Garrett and Zara. "And this Prescott fellow, you believe he'll come after you?" "I do," Garrett replied gravely. "He's not the type to accept defeat, especially not when his pride is involved." "Well, he'll find more than he bargained for if he comes to Clearwater," Walt said firmly. "We take care of our own here." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Zara said quickly. "We can move on if—" "Nonsense," Eliza interrupted, her gentle manner belying the steel in her voice. "You'll stay right here where you're safe, both of you?" She turned to her husband. "Tell them, Walt." Walt nodded, his expression serious. "Garrett, you know I've been wanting a partner in this operation for years. The offer still stands. You help me run this place, you get a share in it. And Zara," he continued, turning to her, "Eliza could use help with the household and the boys. Plus, Garrett tells me you're good with horses. We could use that expertise too." "Are you serious?" Zara asked, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "Never more so," Walt assured her. "We've been looking to expand for years, but good help is hard to find, especially people we can trust with the breeding program." Garrett looked at Zara, his eyes questioning. "What do you think? It would give us both a fresh start." Zara looked around the room at the genuine kindness in Walt and Eliza's faces, at the comfort and security they were offering, and finally at Garrett, whose steady presence had become her anchor in the storm of the past week. "I think," she said slowly, "that we would be fools to refuse such generosity." The relief on Garrett's face was palpable. "Then it's settled. We stay." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Garrett and Zara settled into life at Clearwater Ranch. Garrett fell easily into partnership with Walt, his expertise with difficult horses proving invaluable to the breeding operation. Zara split her time between helping Eliza with the household and working with the horses, her skills quickly earning the respect of the ranch hands. They were given separate cabins on the property, Garrett taking a small bunkhouse near the stables, while Zara moved into a cozy one-room cabin closer to the main house. The arrangement provided privacy while keeping them both within the protective circle of the ranch. As April gave way to May, the mountains shed their snow and wildflowers began to carpet the meadows. Zara found herself blooming along with the landscape, the constant fear that had been her companion gradually giving way to a cautious optimism about her future. Her relationship with Garrett was evolving too. They saw each other daily, working side by side with the horses or sharing meals with the Simmons family. Their easy partnership from the trail had deepened into a friendship based on mutual respect and growing affection. Sometimes she would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression thoughtful and warm. On a sunny afternoon in late May, Zara was working with a young filly in the round pen when she sensed someone watching her. Looking up, she saw Garrett leaning on the fence, his expression appreciative. "She's responding well to you," he said, nodding toward the filly. "She just needed patience," Zara replied, giving the horse a final pat before joining Garrett at the fence. "Most of them do." "Like people," Garrett observed with a small smile. Zara returned his smile, struck as always by how at ease she felt in his company. "Walt mentioned you're riding into Denver tomorrow," Garrett nodded. "Supply run, and Walt wants me to speak with a potential buyer for some of the yearlings." He hesitated, then added, "I thought you might like to come along. It's a full day's ride each way, so we'd stay overnight, but Denver's a proper city. Might be nice for you to see something beyond the ranch." Zara felt a flutter of both excitement and apprehension. She hadn't left Clearwater since their arrival, feeling safer within its boundaries. But the thought of seeing Denver, of having time alone with Garrett away from their daily routines, was appealing. "I'd like that," she said, making her decision, "if Eliza can spare me." "Already asked her," Garrett admitted with a sheepish grin. "She said you've more than earned a trip to town." They set out early the next morning, riding two of Walt's finest horses. The journey to Denver was pleasant, the late spring weather perfect for traveling. They talked easily as they rode, sharing stories from their pasts and observations about their new life at Clearwater. Denver itself was a revelation to Zara. Though not as large as some eastern cities, it was still far bigger than Quartzsite, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and a bustling energy that spoke of growth and opportunity. They attended to Walt's business, first meeting with suppliers and the potential buyer, who was suitably impressed with Garrett's knowledge of horseflesh. Afterward, they had time to explore the city. Garrett took Zara to a respectable restaurant for dinner, insisting on treating her to a proper meal. Seated across from him in the lamp-lit dining room, Zara was suddenly conscious of how this might appear to others very much like a courting couple. The thought brought heat to her cheeks, but not displeasure. In the 2 months since they'd left Arizona, her feelings for Garrett had evolved from cautious gratitude to genuine affection, and increasingly, to something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. "Penny for your thoughts," Garrett said, watching her over his coffee cup. "I was just thinking about how much has changed," Zara replied honestly. 3 months ago, I was preparing to marry a man I feared. Now I'm here, in a city I've never seen before, building a life I never imagined possible." "Any regrets?" Garrett asked, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Not one," she assured him, echoing her words from their first day on the trail. "Though I do still worry about my family, I wish there was some way to let them know I'm safe without revealing where I am." Garrett was quiet for a moment, considering. "I might have a way," he said finally. "There's a fellow here in Denver used to ride with the Pony Express when I did. He's a lawyer now, but he still has connections all over the territories. He might be able to get a message to your family discreetly." Hope surged in Zara's chest. "Could he, without putting them at risk from Harold?" "Worth asking," Garrett said. "We can see him tomorrow before we head back to the ranch." They spent the night at a respectable hotel in separate rooms this time. The next morning, they visited Garrett's friend, James Whitley, whose law office was in one of Denver's newer buildings. The lawyer listened attentively to their situation, his expression growing grave. "I can certainly get a message to your family," he told Zara. "But there's something else you should know." He hesitated, glancing at Garrett. "I keep an eye on legal notices from various territories as part of my work. 2 weeks ago, I saw a notice from Arizona Territory, a man named Harold Prescott offering a reward for information leading to the return of his kidnapped fiancée and the capture of the man who took her." Zara felt the blood drain from her face. "Kidnapped? He's claiming you kidnapped me." "It's not uncommon," Whitley said gently. "In cases like these, the spurned suitor often tries to use the law to his advantage, claiming kidnapping gives him legal grounds to pursue you across territorial lines." "But that's absurd," Zara protested. "I left willingly." "I left a note explaining my decision, which he likely destroyed," Garrett pointed out, his expression grim. "It would be his word against yours, and as a woman, he didn't need to finish the thought." They all knew how little weight a woman's testimony would carry against a wealthy man's accusations. "What can we do?" Zara asked, looking between the two men. Whitley leaned back in his chair, considering. "You've been in Colorado how long now?" "Almost 2 months," Garrett replied. "That helps." "Colorado has different laws regarding women's property rights and marriage than Arizona Territory." The lawyer tapped his fingers thoughtfully against his desk. "My advice: stay put at Clearwater for now. I'll get your message to your family through channels Prescott won't be able to trace. And I'll keep an eye on the situation legally." They left the lawyer's office with mixed emotions: relief that they could send word to Zara's family, but renewed concern that Harold hadn't given up his pursuit. The ride back to Clearwater was quieter than their journey into Denver, both of them preoccupied with this new information. As they crested the final ridge before the ranch came into view, Garrett reined in his horse, signaling for Zara to do the same. "Zara," he began, his expression unusually serious. "I need to say something." She waited, a flutter of nervous anticipation in her chest. "When we left Arizona, I told you that you'd be free to make your own choices, free to find your own way." He looked out over the landscape, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley below. "I meant that, and I still do, but these past 2 months working alongside you, seeing your strength and your kindness." He turned back to her, his eyes intense. "I find myself hoping that your choice might include me." Zara's breath caught in her throat. "Garrett, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know you're still finding your footing here, still healing from what you left behind. I just wanted you to know where I stand. That when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here." The sincerity in his voice, the careful respect with which he offered his heart without demanding anything in return, moved Zara deeply. This was so different from Harold's possessive courtship, from her father's practical arrangement of her future. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly, "and for understanding that I need time." Garrett nodded, a small smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "We've got plenty of that." They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in companionable silence, something new and fragile but undeniably real growing in the space between them. Life at Clearwater continued through the summer, falling into comfortable rhythms of work and rest. Zara received word through James Whitley that her family was well, relieved to know she was safe, and that her father had managed to negotiate new terms with the bank using the money she and Garrett had left. Harold, the message said, had indeed been furious, but his influence in Quartzsite had waned as rumors of his true nature spread. The news eased a burden Zara hadn't realized she was still carrying. She threw herself into ranch life with renewed energy, expanding her role beyond the household to take a more active part in training the younger horses. Walt, recognizing her natural gift with the animals, increasingly deferred to her judgment, particularly with the more spirited mares. Her relationship with Garrett evolved too, growing deeper and more comfortable with each passing day. They often rode out together to check the herds in the high meadows, sharing picnic lunches and conversations that ranged from practical ranch matters to their hopes for the future. He was patient, never pushing, but the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her left no doubt about his feelings. By late August, Zara knew her own heart. She loved Garrett Adams, loved his quiet strength, his unwavering respect for her independence, his gentle way with horses and children alike. But something still held her back from telling him, some lingering fear she couldn't quite name. The answer came on a warm evening as they sat on the porch of her cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. They'd developed a habit of ending their days this way, sharing the quiet moments between work and sleep. "I had a letter from Whitley today," Garrett said, breaking their comfortable silence. "He's heard rumors that Prescott might have hired someone to track us down. Nothing certain, just whispers, but enough that he thought we should know." Zara felt the familiar clench of fear in her stomach. After all this time, it's been almost 5 months. "Men like Prescott don't forgive easily," Garrett replied, his expression grim. "Their pride won't let them." "So we'll never truly be free of him?" The question came out more bitter than she'd intended. Garrett turned to look at her directly. "Is that what's been holding you back, fear that he'll find us?" Zara was startled by his perception, but she nodded slowly. "Partly. I've built something here, Garrett. I've found work I love, friends who care about me, a place where I belong." She took a deep breath. "And I've found you, the thought of losing all of that because of Harold's wounded pride." "You haven't lost it yet," Garrett pointed out gently. "And living in fear of what might happen isn't really living at all." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Whatever comes, Zara, we'll face it together. That's what partners do, partners." The word that had defined their relationship from the beginning, that had grown to mean so much more than a simple arrangement for mutual survival. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could second-guess herself. "I've loved you for months now, but I was afraid to build something that might be taken away." The joy that bloomed in Garrett's eyes was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "more than I thought possible." He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. But Zara closed the distance between them instead, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms came around her, strong and secure, and she felt the last of her reservations melt away. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not because you need protection, not because society expects it, but because we choose each other freely and completely." "Yes," Zara answered without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in September, in a simple ceremony on the ranch with the Simmons family and a few trusted ranch hands as witnesses. James Whitley came from Denver to officiate, bringing news that the rumors about Harold had quieted, though he cautioned them to remain vigilant. The celebration afterward was joyful, with music and dancing lasting well into the night. Walt surprised them with a wedding gift, a deed to a parcel of Clearwater land, and a small house he'd had the hands renovating secretly for weeks. "A man and his wife need their own place," he explained, brushing aside their thanks with typical gruffness. "Besides, this way I can keep my best horse trainers close at hand." Later that night, alone in their new home, Garrett and Zara stood by the window, looking out at the mountains silvered by moonlight. Garrett's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "Though I still find it hard to believe sometimes that I found you, that we escaped, that we built this life together." "Believe it," Garrett said, turning her gently to face him. "This is real, Zara, this is ours." As winter descended on Clearwater Ranch, bringing snow to the mountains and quiet days of work close to home, Zara and Garrett settled into married life with a joy neither had expected to find. The ranch thrived under their combined expertise, with Walt increasingly leaving the day-to-day operations to them as he focused on expanding their connections with buyers in the East. In late November, James Whitley arrived unannounced, his expression grave as he asked to speak with them privately. Seated in their small parlor, the lawyer didn't mince words. "Harold Prescott is dead," he said without preamble. Zara felt shock ripple through her. "Dead? How?" "Shot in a saloon fight in Tucson," Whitley replied. Apparently he'd taken to drinking heavily these past few months, picking fights with anyone who crossed him. According to my sources, he accused a local rancher of stealing his horse. Words were exchanged, then bullets. Prescott didn't survive. Zara looked at Garrett, seeing her own mixed emotions reflected in his eyes. She felt no joy at Harold's death, only a profound relief that the shadow of his pursuit was finally lifted. "There's more," Whitley continued. "Before he died, Prescott apparently confessed to a friend that he'd hired a man to find you both. A bounty hunter named Jackson. With Prescott dead, Jackson has no reason to continue the hunt, but I thought you should know he was out there." "Thank you for coming all this way to tell us," Garrett said, clasping the lawyer's hand. "We owe you a great debt." Whitley shook his head. "Just doing my job, and I admit to a personal interest in seeing justice served. Men like Prescott who think their money puts them above the law deserve what they get." After the lawyer had gone, Zara and Garrett sat by their fire, processing the news that the threat they'd lived with for so long was finally over. "Do you feel different?" Garrett asked, watching her face in the firelight. Zara considered the question carefully. "I feel lighter," she said finally. "As if a weight I've been carrying for so long has been lifted, but also sad in a way. Harold's life ended so pointlessly, consumed by bitterness and rage." "That was his choice," Garrett reminded her gently. "Just as you chose a different path." She nodded, looking around their small home at the life they were building together. "I'm glad I had the courage to make that choice." "So am I," Garrett said, drawing her close. "Every single day." As the years passed, Clearwater Ranch grew and prospered. Zara and Garrett's partnership expanded to include Walt and Eliza as they developed one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the West. Their personal happiness grew too, with the birth of their son Daniel in the spring of 1880, followed by twins Samuel and Sarah in 1882. Zara maintained correspondence with her family in Arizona, and in 1883 they made the journey to Quartzsite for a long overdue reunion. Her parents had aged, but their joy at seeing Zara and meeting her husband and children was boundless. Lily, now married to Thomas, the former foreman, had 2 children of her own, and the cousins played together as if they'd known each other all their lives. On their last night in Quartzsite, Zara and Garrett walked to the North Creek where their journey together had begun 5 years earlier. The landscape was the same, the starry desert sky, the gentle murmur of the creek, but they were different, shaped by the years and choices that had brought them to this moment. "Any regrets?" Garrett asked, echoing the question he'd asked her that first night on the trail. Zara looked up at him, at the face that had become dearer to her than any other, and shook her head. "Not one," she said, as she always did. "You saved me that day in front of the general store, you know, not just from Harold, but from a life half-lived." Garrett's arms encircled her waist, drawing her close. "You saved yourself, Zara. I just offered a hand along the way." She smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. "Then I'm grateful for the hand and for every day since." As they stood together under the desert stars where their story had begun, Zara thought about the long journey from that frightened young woman to the person she was now: wife, mother, partner in a thriving business, mistress of her own destiny. All because she had found the courage to choose freedom, to believe in the possibility of a different life, and because a cowboy had cared enough to speak the truth that day in Quartzsite. "A man who beats his horses will beat his wife. Imagine what he'll do to you later." Words that had changed everything, setting her on a path to the happiness she now held in her arms, a happiness hard won, but all the more precious for the courage it had taken to claim it.